Hello and welcome to Error-Driven Coding. Here, I want to talk more deeply about the differences between an external function and a public function in Solidity. Now, when you go ahead and create functions, which are super common in smart contracts, you have to assign what's called a visibility. Functions can either be external, public, internal, or private. But what's the difference between an external one and a public one? Well, you can see here that public functions can be called externally from other contracts or internally as well. However, external functions can only be called externally. They cannot be called internally unless you use the keyword this, which is kind of a hack and it's not often used. Why would you want to use external versus public? Well, this question has actually been asked on Stack Overflow, and the answer is actually pretty clear. The main difference is basically in gas cost. Here's an example where you can see we've got a public function, and then down below we've got an external function. The public function uses 496 gas, while the external one only uses 261. But the next question is why? To answer that, you have to know a bit about how storing data on the Ethereum virtual machine works. So let's jump into the documentation here, where it says that the Ethereum virtual machine has three main areas where it can store data: storage, memory, and the stack. And in fact, there's one more area called call data, which I'll talk about as well. Storage is basically a place that you can permanently store variables and access at a later point in time. All functions in the contract can access this variable, and you can think of it as like a hard drive on your computer. Next, we've got an area called memory. This is just a temporary data location that is cheap and can only be accessed within the function itself. One way to think of this is that memory is very similar to the RAM on your computer. There's also a place called the stack. That's because the Ethereum virtual machine is a stack-based machine, so all the computations are performed on a stack. This is non-persistent data, and it has a limitation of only 1024 elements in the stack, so it's actually quite a small place. Now, I did mention there was a fourth place where information could be stored. And if I scroll down here, you can see that contracts can call other contracts by means of a call. What happens is that in this call, there's a data payload that can get transferred. When a contract calls another contract, for example, it receives a cleared instance of memory to access this payload, and it's provided in a separate area called call data. So just a quick recap, we've got storage, we've got memory, and also call data as well. And then finally, we've got the stack. So let's now jump back to the reason why external functions are cheaper than public functions. Now, public functions need to write all of the arguments into memory, and memory is expensive. Call data is very cheap. So the reason why public functions are more expensive than external functions is because public functions in Solidity copies the arguments, the information, the data into memory, whereas external functions can read it directly from call data. So that's the main reason. Now, how does this work in practice? Well, let's go ahead and copy this code here and see if we can prove if it is indeed cheaper and by how much. Let's go into Remix, which is an Ethereum IDE, and I'm going to create a new file here. Let's call public versus external functions. And then I'm going to paste the code here. And let's go first of all increase the version number to 0.06. And let's go and check out some of these errors here. So first up, we can see we've got data location must be memory. So the original code was using version 0.4. In version 5 and above, we actually have to explicitly state the memory location. So here it's saying it must be memory. So let's go ahead and say memory, like so. And then here, the next error is saying data location must be called data. So automatically, you can see that because in the newer version, the data location must be explicitly stated, it makes it a lot clearer to see that, hey, when I use a public function, it's stored in memory. When I use an external function, it's storing the data in called data. The other warnings here is that we can restrict the mutability to be pure. So let's do that. Pure basically means that we're promising we're not going to read or modify any state. So let's add that in to get rid of all the errors, and we can run this. Now, to make it a bit easier to demonstrate, I'm going to reduce the size of the array because I don't want to be providing 10 elements into an array. So let's go ahead and create an array size of 2. And I want to go ahead and access the second element of the array and multiply it by 2. And I'll do the same thing down here as well. So I'm declaring in test2 an array of size 2. I'm going to access the second element and double that as well. So let's go ahead and deploy this and check it out. Let's go ahead and hit deploy. And you can see down here, I've got the contract deployed, and I can go now and run my test. So I'm going to fill the array with some variables. Let's go, the first element, I'll make it 3. And then the second element, I'll make 5. So what's going to happen is when I hit test, I'm allocating 3 and 5 into my array of 2 elements. It's going to return the second element of A, and then it's going to double this. So I will expect the second element to be 5 multiplied by 2 to give me 10. So let's try it out. There we go. You can see it returns 10. Now let's go ahead into the debug mode down here, and I'm going to scroll through the logs, and you can see the gas cost here is 495. Let me expand that up. 495 gas. So it's actually not too far from here where in Stack Overflow it was stated as 496. So that's pretty accurate. Let's go ahead and run the second function. Let me copy this and paste it down here. Let me minimize the logs. I'll run test number 2, and it has executed successfully. Let's expand the details, scroll down, and you can see here it's actually 326 gas. So it's not quite the 261 that was mentioned in Stack Overflow, but it is indeed less. The difference is probably because the version is different and there's some extra calculations that are happening under the covers. So there you go. The main difference between using external and internal is the gas. It's a lot cheaper to use external because of how the memory location works. And just to finish up, you can see here it almost never makes sense to use this dot function pattern as it requires a real call to be executed. So even though external functions can be accessed internally with the keyword this, you usually wouldn't want to use this. So hopefully this gives you an insight into the main difference between external functions and public functions, mainly relating to how memory is allocated and used. Catch you next time.